All right, we are up to day 176 of going through my old journals, and yeah, I'll just get into it. The quote for today says, "Poetry is thoughts that breathe and words that burn." How do you feel about poetry? What poem really resonates with you, and do you have a favorite poet? Express all that you feel about poetry below. So if you're following along, just take a minute, pause, think about how you may respond to this, and I will read what I wrote. And to be honest, let's see, just thinking off the top of my head, I feel like this would be a hard one because I'm not really into poetry, but let's see what it says. It says, I've never felt a connection to poetry. I remember hating the weeks we'd study it in high school. I didn't understand it or why people liked it. It honestly felt somewhat pretentious. Like, why not just come out and say what you mean? And I felt like someone who was truly artistic enough to convey their thoughts and emotions through poetry wouldn't be thinking about things like the use of iambic pentameter or whatever other techniques they were teaching us in school. Okay, this is interesting. So yeah, I've never understood poetry. I'm like straightforward. I've talked about this a little bit, how I'm not artistic. I don't really understand art. I don't get those feelings that other people get about art, or even like I've talked about nature. You know, some people can go out in nature and get this like great feeling, and I just don't have that for whatever reason. I mean, I've been to like some of the biggest art galleries in the world when I was like traveling through Europe, and I just honestly felt so bored like going through there. And I know that's not like the way I was supposed to feel. I was like trying to like look at the paintings and try to understand it. But yeah, like I would have to find ways to make myself interested in the art. And so like the way I would find would be to read the little plaques next to the art. I felt like I got more out of reading the plaques next to it than like really viewing some of the art. And so I kind of put poetry in that regard. Like I'd rather just read words. I don't know why people need to like play games, unless there's people, I guess, that are more artistic and reading it as poetry makes it more interesting to them. Maybe some people get the points better that way. I don't know, but it's just not, I don't get it. I'm not hating on people that do like poetry and art, but I don't understand it. So I said, I actually came across a poet on TikTok a few months ago that I felt a strong connection to. But it wasn't really to her poetry, but to her story. She described her struggles in dealing with infidelity and narcissism, and said that her poetry stemmed from needing an outlet to process her emotions. Because I could relate to a lot of what she had gone through in her previous relationship, I thought I may feel a connection to her poetry. So she had a book. It was a small book of poetry, and I ordered it because I thought, well, since I know her backstory and I know where these poems were coming from, then maybe I could relate better to the poems. And I said, but nope, nothing. I even tried to feel something and it just wasn't there. I don't know. I guess things like this just aren't for me. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I feel. And I was actually having a talk with my roommate this morning at the gym, and he had brought up that something kind of interesting in a book that he was reading. So after like the big industrial revolution, when we had all these like robber barons really that made all of this money suddenly, and they were buying art and things like that, like after a lot of them started dying off, I guess like a lot of these big art collectors were struggling to find buyers for their art. And so I guess what he was saying was they got together and they put together a book of all of these like 100 art pieces that they wanted to try to get Henry Ford to buy. because he was one of the richest men in the world at that time. But he was one of these guys that lived kind of like a more meager life. Like he didn't, like, I guess, have like a huge house or whatever. And he looked at the book that they'd put together for him, and he was like, wow, these are some nice pictures, you know, like, thanks for the book. And they were like, no, we want to sell you these art pieces. He was like, well, why would I buy them when I've got pictures of them right here? And I guess that's kind of how I feel about it. I feel like a lot of art is kind of like NFTs, in the sense that a lot of the value, oh gosh, maybe I'm gonna get some hate for this because I just don't get it, but this is what I've put to, and this is getting off from poetry, but I feel like a lot of the value in art is just based on having something that's rare that someone assigns a value to, just like collecting anything. Like there's a lot of collectibles that, like, I remember when Beanie Babies were a big thing, and everybody was wanting to buy these Beanie Babies, not because like they really wanted the Beanie Babies or loved them, but because like, oh, these are a rare one and they're going to be valuable and I can resell them for all this money. And I think that a lot of art pieces are like that. It's not about like that you love the art, it's that you can tell people, I have a piece by this artist. And then even who gets recognized as an artist is kind of abstract, in the sense that it's like whoever other people say is a good artist is who, you know, has good art. And I was telling my roommate that like I went to the Guggenheim in Venice one time, and I was just like so underwhelmed by a lot of the art that was in there. Like I was reading the plaques and everything, and I was just like, and I know a lot of people that aren't into art will say things like this of like, well, I could do that. They just painted a line on a canvas, you know? But that really was what it was. There was like some canvases that just had like a line drawn down it, and that was a piece in the Guggenheim. And it sounds like it's really just a club of like whoever these rich people say are great artists. And if you've ever watched like Exit Through the Gift Shop, you know, I think that movie kind of touches on that aspect of it. Like, anyway, I'm getting way off track, but yeah, poetry, art, I don't know if like that part of my brain just isn't the same as the people who are into that stuff, but I just don't get it. I'd rather have you just come out and say what you mean. Maybe I just haven't read good poetry though, like, because the book of the girl that I bought, I just don't know. Like, I don't know if she's a good poet or not. So maybe I just haven't read anything good. So I don't know if anybody has recommendations on like a good poem or something I should check out. Yeah, but even with like the books that I do read, I don't even like fiction. If I like, the book that I'm reading right now is a nonfiction book where this lady, what's it called? It's called Worlds Apart, and it's about this lady that wanted to understand what life was like for like people living in poor areas of the country. And she went out and interviewed like over 300 people about their town. And so most of this book is just like quotes from people that she talked to, and she is kind of like weaving together a story about the area, but I do prefer nonfiction, and I always have, but the older that I get, but I used to also like to kind of like, with movies and stuff, watch kind of mindless stuff sometimes, but I'm finding that like I'm not even getting as much enjoyment out of that. I have a hard time like watching movies that I like. I'm getting to where I prefer documentaries, and I mean, I don't know if movies have changed or if I've changed, but it just seems like the quality of films, like, used to, I could like get lost in a story in a movie, but I'm struggling to do that anymore. So, which kind of sucks, because sometimes I do just want to sit down and turn my brain off, and I just haven't been able to find much lately that allows me to do that. So anyway, totally off track with this, but that's what I had for this day. I'll be back tomorrow with day 177.